buildings. Pay attention to the photographs taken after liberation of the camp, but they show the interior, they show what the buildings were like at that time. Now you can see just bunks, but no blankets, no pots, no straw. I mentioned that each of the buildings was used for accommodation of 400 prisoners on average. We know about the numbers from documents which supervisors, named blockmasters, had to fill every day with data: how many people slept in a building, how many died at night, how many got food, how many went to hospitals. So based on the documents, we know that there were 400 people in each building. There were two types of bunks installed in the barracks. We will see such bunks when we go to Auschwitz. Two people slept in each level. But in this building, let's maybe come closer so that you can see them. There were different kind of bunks, 6, 8, even up to 10 people were squeezed in each level, which depended on how many were actually in the building, in the camp. But look please at the bunks, they standing in angle, slanting, because standing this way didn't take as much space as if they were straight. So we're a little bit shorter. It was possible to save space for another bed, and prisoners slept with their heads a little bit above their legs. So that's why they're slanting, to save space, to house more people. And you notice the heating system, due to German regulations, buildings in concentration camps had to be equipped with heaters, and they were. You can see the stoves. When we go to Auschwitz, you will see ceramic heaters inside the buildings. One of the buildings in Auschwitz had the central heating system installed, but it was the building with offices for SS inside. But the regulations did not say anything about fuel. So SS-men did not feel obliged to provide prisoners with fuel, but blockmasters, so prisoners who were supervisors, also slept inside the building, so they also suffered from cold. That's why prisoners were allowed to smuggle wood and coal from their workplaces, but it was not easy to heat the buildings because you can see the gaps, lack of insulation. So it was very cold in the buildings in winter, but also very hot in summer. And in summertime, prisoners could not keep the door open like this for ventilation at night. And I told you that we're not allowed to go out to toilet. Could use buckets, which stood at the entrances at the door to each building, but some people were too weak to leave bunks, or so squeezed among others that they could hardly move. And the ones who could not hold till the morning were ill or weak, relieved themselves in beds. So straw blankets were soiled with excrements. So you can imagine other insects, especially lice, that swarmed in the buildings. And lice caused spread of typhoid in the camp. So conditions in this part of Auschwitz were so catastrophic that most of people who got to this camp lasted for only 2 or 3 months. In a moment we will go to the first camp where conditions were much better. Because in the first camp, prisoners slept in the buildings built before the war, buildings which functioned as the Polish army barracks. So conditions were much better, but food, but work, but treatment and threat to go to gas chamber was in both parts of Auschwitz exactly the same, but conditions much better. So let's please go to Auschwitz 1.
And from this place, the human ashes were thrown to nearby rivers, the Vistula, Sola, were used because the area was muddy. So prisoners dug drainage ditches, and human ashes were used for leveling roads, for building roads in Birkenau, as fertilizer for German farms. So that's why. It was room for block senior, and the next room it was room for bread, for evening meal. Why? Because they work very hard, 10, 11 hours a day, 12 hours a day. They work by means of very primitive tools. First group of prisoners which arrived at a camp in Auschwitz, they march out every day and dismantle old buildings, build new buildings, new accommodation for camp authorities, new building for offices, headquarters. They were used as slave laborers. So then they march out every day to work in coal mines, in munition factories, in Wunderwerke factory, because all factories were bought by German private companies, and prisoners were used as slave laborers. Part of prisoners built this camp, because all this camp was under construction. They started to build camp number 3, called Mexico, because women prisoners wore colorful dresses, then racks of dresses. And prisoners called this camp Mexico. And they planned to build camp number 4, and also they planned to build camp number 6. So they thought about future. And they received food 3 times a day, 3 meals. Breakfast, it was a half a liter of black coffee, or a half a liter of tea, or water with herbs. Dinner, it was a 1 liter of water with meatless soup, cooked from rotten vegetables. Potatoes, what kind? Potatoes, turnips, and cabbage. And supper, it was a half a liter of coffee or tea or water, and a piece of bread. It was about 300 grams, with 20 grams of margarine, with a spoonful of, I know, Noja marmalade cooked from beetroots. So a spoonful only. It was about 1,300, 500 calories. But a healthy norm for one's sedentary job, 2,600 calories, it's enough. But for one's working very hard, as prisoners, did 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, depends on weather condition. Because as I mentioned, Polish winters, wartime winters were very, very harsh, 25 centigrade below zero. So that's why. And 3 level beds for 7, for 8, for 10. Prisoners, they slept on straw, on paper mattresses, on paper bags. As I said today, they used their heavy shoes as pillows. They covered with blankets, but very often they were racks of blankets full of fleas, lice, bugs, and in Birkenau also were rats. So, in August of 1944, in this camp were housed about 100,000 prisoners, men, women, and children. Yes, area was much, much bigger, but they were clumped together, so 600, 700, and so-called heating system was built. Why so-called? Because how to heat this kind, warm this kind of barrack, and then wooden barrack. So it could, when they received only a bucket of coal a day, but outside was 25, 30 centigrades below zero, for example. And please go and see. So who was left in Auschwitz I? Because
as Obersturmbannführer, or Sami Kanu, and he didn't have to commute to work. He worked in the building which is on the right-hand side, and he lived in the building on the left-hand side with his wife and their 5 children. He was a family man, like most of the officers. They lived in the town, he lived here. The German soldiers had their quarters near Birkenau, Auschwitz II camp. So the youngest daughter was born in the building here in 1943, so she will be 65, she is most probably, no one knows. After the war they split and changed their family names, and he went into hiding and was tracked down by the British police 1 year later in Germany and arrested, turned up in Nuremberg as witness for a while only, because then, according to international agreements, he was delivered to Poles, extradited. And in Warsaw they put him on trial, and he was sentenced to death by Polish Supreme Court. Before he died, he spent several months in prison, so he wrote his autobiography there, which was published. And then he reconverted to Catholicism. He was sorry. He confessed all his sins to a Polish priest who pardoned him, so he received communion and went up straight to heaven. In April 1947, 2 years after the end of the war, hanged in at this gallows right here in front of the work of his life. So, and not far away from his family house, and not far away, even closer, to the first crematorium, the only one surviving. The building was here before the war already as the Polish Army munition bunker. Then it became for 2 years a morgue and a crematorium. And then in 1942, when they started killing, they had a slight technical problem because there were no gas chambers and they wanted already to kill. So while they were constructing Birkenau gas chambers, they made the morgue into a temporary makeshift gas chamber, and they killed several thousand people there before moving the killing to Birkenau finally. Which is why the building survived, because later in 1943 it was a warehouse, and in 1944, because of the Americans flying overhead, they made it into a bomb shelter. And at the same time they built all around the camps, maybe you have seen already, those little one-person bomb shelters. This was for the soldier who was normally in the watchtower. When the Americans approached, and we'll say a word about the Americans later in Birkenau, he was inside with his machine gun towards the camp so that no one tried to escape. Was the idea behind. As it was, the camp never became the target for the Allied planes. They only flew overhead taking pictures and heading for IG Farben, which was bombed in August, October, November 44. So all this remains untouched. The only things reconstructed are the chimney and 2 of the 3 crematoria, because they were dismantled by Germans in 1943 when they moved killing to Birkenau. Otherwise the building is original. This was the road taken by the people who were to die. They turned right and there was a wooden fence on the other side. They entered a little court. The Germans from the roof atop reminded them to lace the shoes together and not to forget where they left their belongings. And then ladies first with children, as always, they entered inside and left through the chimney, as it was referred to in the camp. They were burned. Where many people spent the last moments of their life. You entered through the door, to the right and to the left, and then there was a long room with 5 holes in the ceiling where they were murdered. Then the bodies were loaded on trolleys and pushed to the crematoria. The fuel used was coke. 1000 Celsius degrees were needed to burn them. Some of those who worked in the building, Sonderkommando prisoners, survived, so they gave testimonies after the war. When they opened the door, as they said, they could see always the several hundred people dead standing. There was no room to fall. Blood, excrement, pregnant women giving birth in agony. And their job was now to burn them as quickly as possible. After removing everything, they were put into the crematorium. 2 men and 1 woman. One woman at a time. Women burned better, as they explained, and they elaborated the whole way of burning the bodies. The corpses of the children were put atop because of the small bones, which they didn't want to fall down too early. The load was pushed in, the door was locked, and then 15 minutes later, whatever remained was down. It was taken out, bigger bones were put into a device for grinding bones, then everything was crushed, put through a sieve. Once it was fine enough, it was loaded on a truck and taken to the river. The capacity here was 340 per day, which was enough in the beginning. Later it turned out not enough, so finally in 1943 they closed down this little business here and they opened something better, more industrial enough to Birkenau camp, which we'll see once we are out.